What's up, guys, and welcome to another Heat Seeker Sports Best Ball Show. Today I'm going to be joined by Steve Shoup over from FanSpeak. He's an expert on the NFL draft and NFL rookies. He follows college football closely, so he has a good understanding of what we're looking at with this rookie class and the guys that we need to pay attention to during the draft. We're going to look at landing spot potential and all that kind of stuff that's going to affect our ADP for Underdog best ball drafts. So that's coming up after this. We'll be right back. Hey, what's up, guys? Simon Edwards at Pumacom here with Heat Seeker Sports. Today, I'm joined by Steve Shoup over from FanSpeak. We're going to go over rookies today. We're going over rookies for the 2024 NFL Draft. We're going to tell you who Steve likes. Steve was running the Sims before anyone else was in that game, and he's done very well with it in the past, including nailing a bunch of the rookies last year. We're not going to do a draft today. Underdog does not have any drafts currently, so we're going to just go over all these rookies. It'll give us more time to focus on the breakdown for that. Steve, what's going on, man? I'm glad to have you on. I've heard a lot about you from Meg and from watching your content, but it's good to be talking to you face to face here.
Yeah, no, it's great to finally meet you. Thanks for having me on, and excited to talk about rookies. Yeah, drafts this week, and we get to see these landing spots. So yeah, we've been drafting them with this, beforehand, and just kind of drafting them without knowing where they're going. But come Thursday and Friday, that's mainly where the rookies we're going to be targeting will be. We'll know where they end up and kind of see, are they going to be a team's number one weapon or not, and be able to accurately place them. So it's going to get exciting, but yeah, it's fun to talk about now because we get to see, the potential and get to theorize how it matches up.
Yeah, for sure. And before we get into this breakdown, make sure to hit like on the video. I'm looking for 20 likes to trigger my second video. We've already triggered the Atlanta Falcons. I'm going to put that out shortly after the draft. It's going to be a shorter video with a breakdown on the team. I'm targeting either the Houston Texans or maybe the Chargers for my second video, depending on how this draft goes. But if you get us to 20 likes, I'll hit that second video shortly after the Atlanta Falcons one. And yes, Steve, so if we're taking a look at what we got going on here with the with the running back situation, let's start off with the running backs, because all I'm hearing on the content that I'm listening to is that the quarterbacks and the wide receivers are the strongest positions in this draft, and that the running backs are, they seem to be getting weaker every year, except last year we obviously had Bijan and we had, Jahmyr Gibbs as kind of breakouts. But in general, running back, it seems to be a position, and I don't blame, these players and coaches and parents for getting their kids away from the running back position, because it's a position where they just grind you into the ground. You get taken completely advantage of with your rookie contract. And by the time your rookie contract is over, you basically got no gas left in the tank. So it's basically pointless to be a running back. And we're seeing the talent kind of follow that trend. But what do you think this season as far as talent goes for these running back rookies?
Yeah, no, I think there's no question that this is probably one of the weaker running back classes we've seen in a while. Even though, last year was definitely an exception of 2 first-round picks. We've seen a lot of strong running back groups in previous years with a lot of second, third round talents that you knew would probably, if they get the right landing spot, be starters. Could be very capable players. 2 years ago, Brees Hall, Walker. They got good landing spots and they were hit the ground running. And obviously injuries affected Hall that year. But, this year we just don't really have that. The most talented back in this class is Jonathan Brooks, but he's coming off a November ACL injury. And, he'll probably come back at some point this year, but probably not, week one. yeah, probably not even in October. So you're essentially hoping that a team believes enough in him to give him a starting role for the second half of the year, which is great for playoff best ball. But that's a big ask. And as we see with a lot of these running backs who come back, it takes them a while to get their feet back underneath them. So even when he's back, those first 4 to 6 weeks, he might not be able to do much.
Yeah, and you mentioned Breece Hall. Breece Hall is a perfect example of what can happen to a running back after he returns from injury like that. Started off the season last year very slow, started to pick it up towards the end of the season. He did have a big game in week 1, but then after that, he kind of dropped off for a little bit. But yeah, these running backs that are coming off of ACL injuries, especially a rookie, you probably want to be ultra cautious about that. And Jonathan Brooks, unless he's going the 16th through 18th round, I'd probably tend to avoid that unless there's like no better options. But we got like a pretty deep rookie class of wide receivers, so we might see a lot of these wide receivers going in that range. But what are your thoughts on Blake Corum? Do you think that he's going to be the first running back drafted, or do you think it'll be Brooks?
It still definitely could be Brooks, just his pure talent and upside alone, even if it is going to be a partially redshirted season for him. So I could still see him being the first back drafted. I think there is other competition to Corum. Trey Benson is definitely going to be in the mix. I think, I think Marshawn Lloyd had a strong combine and boosted himself up. So those would probably be the guys. But Corum is, he's going to remind people of like a Doug Martin. He's not the biggest guy, not the fastest guy. But he gets the job done. We saw it at Michigan. Obviously, just an elite offensive line at Michigan. But he was just very highly productive there in Big Ten play. He really was the focus of that team. I know we're going to be talking about J.J. McCarthy later, but is Blake Corum, that has led them to the college playoffs these last couple of years, including the championship this year. So you got to give him a lot of credit, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see him with his former team in the Chargers. They got rid of obviously Austin Eckler. They did bring in former Ravens backs and Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, but Dobbins coming off his own injuries and Edwards has his own injury history as well. So I would not be surprised to see the Chargers look Corum's way, which would be a good landing spot for him, of course. But I think Corum is where he's going in value is solid, and I've taken a good chunk of him. But yeah, we do hope that he finds a landing spot where he gets the work, because he's not going to be some complete elite back. He's just not the biggest, strongest, fastest guy. But he's tough, and he should grind out touchdowns, catch the ball decently well. That was never majorly his game in college, but I think he's capable enough.
Yeah, and did he play for Michigan? Did he play for Harbaugh?
Michigan, yeah.
Yeah. Gotcha. So yeah, I mean, so that would make a lot of sense. San Diego. One thing that's interesting with, Los Angeles Chargers. One thing that's interesting with the Chargers too is the fact, like you mentioned, they brought in a couple of the Ravens running backs. So there's a lot of Ravens blueprint there for the running back situation. So it would make sense for him to go there. Also, with, like you mentioned, yeah, J.K. Dobbins is coming off of an Achilles tear, and he just came off of ACL tear on top of that. So I mean, he is super banged up. So I don't know if he's going to play a major role. We saw with these Achilles injuries in the past, it takes a while, like if ever, for these guys to come off these Achilles injuries, especially a running back. And like a quarterback situation like we're looking at with Kirk Cousins or Aaron Rodgers, that's a little bit less dramatic to come off of when you're a quarterback than a running back who you have to have all that push in your legs and everything. So J.K. Dobbins, I wouldn't look for him to make a major impact on the Chargers. I would look more towards Gus Edwards and whatever rookie they bring in, because I think it's going to be a competition between those two guys. And if it's Blake Corum, like he's coming into a system that he's familiar with, that Harbaugh is going to get him, probably instantly involved
Mhm.
Like at least as the 1B to Gus Edwards 1A. So that'll be an interesting situation to see if and when they draft a rookie running back on the Chargers. Free agency has made things very interesting with this draft, and trying to project who's going to go where and everything. But Blake Corum to the Chargers would make a lot of sense. Jonathan Brooks, like who do you think the actual first running back off the board? Do you agree with like it being either like a guy like Corum or Brooks? Who do you think would outside those two potentially be competing for that first overall running back?
I really think it's probably Trey Benson from Florida State, just because he is healthy. He's a bigger back, can be at the very least like you're between the tackles, goal line back. Catches the ball fine, but that's a problem. Brooks is the most complete back in this draft, and obviously he's the one coming off the injury. So, but I think Benson, if you're a team who is lacking a running back, or very questionable situation at running back right now, he would probably be the guy you feel confident who can be there week one, unlike Brooks, and can do a little of everything, but carry the ball 15 plus times a game. And he's very effective at Florida State these past couple of years. So I think he's not going to be the flashiest guy. He's not going to be put up the most gaudy numbers. Times or anything like that. But I think he's a guy you just give the ball 15 times to, and he gets the job done. Solid, above average type back, but I would not be surprised if he's the first back just from the availability standpoint. He's also not like some of these other guys, like a guy like Marshawn Lloyd or Jalen Wright. They are much more explosive backs, but that sometimes works out with the Jahmyr Gibbs. But you also need Jahmyr Gibbs paired with David Montgomery, also in the right perfect system with the Lions. Would that have worked in every system? Probably not. And those are those types of backs, and they're not even as good as Jahmyr Gibbs. So, Benson is the guy, just a workhorse guy who, for a team who's looking for that guy who can carry the workload. And I just think that's probably, if a team's using a second round pick, they're more likely using it from a necessity standpoint and not a luxury standpoint.
Yeah. So who would you compare Marshawn Lloyd to? Because I've heard a lot of buzz on him, and people kind of projecting that he might be, one of those top running backs off the board. But what are your thoughts on him, and what kind of landing spot would you ideally be looking for him?
Yeah, no, he's very much an explosive back. Could definitely be a weapon out of the backfield, catching the ball, getting him out in space on runs. Like I said, like a kind of a poor man Jahmyr Gibbs, just for obviously last year's comparison. But there's plenty of those types of backs we see every year that just don't work out, or they're only ever limited as like third down back types. And so that's kind of the risk that you run here, that he's never going to be a full, able to carry a full workload, or just can handle the work between the tackles well enough. But I think he's a good back, and probably a late second, early third round type guy. But I just worry about his upside of being a complete back. But I think there are a lot of teams later in the second round who could look in that direction for sure. So I wouldn't be shocked if he goes like in the second round. But probably he's a platoon, more of a platoon type of back than a full lead back. And especially for underdog system with half point PPR, if a lot of his point total comes from receiving, he might be better on a system that rewards that a little better.
Yeah, so DraftKings or drafters might be a better place to focus in on him.
Yeah, I mean, we'll really have to see where he lands. I think landing spot's bigger for him than some other guys because, on some teams, I think he's completely a satellite back. But yeah, there might be a team where he gets a larger crack at the role. It just depends on what teams view him. Just because in college he didn't really show that he could handle the full workload.
Yeah. And what about the other running back that you mentioned? I believe Wright. was his name?
Yeah,
What are your thoughts on him, and which team would you ideally see him land on?
Jalen Wright is probably the most explosive running back in this class. Played at Tennessee, split the workload some there. They're a very wide open spread offense, as we saw last year with like Jalen Hyatt, and when Cedric Tillman came in, their offense is not the most translatable college to pro, and that also applies some to the running backs because they have a lot of light boxes. They face a lot of like 6 people in the box, so he just has to get past the linebacker and he can be gone. He's so fast, so quick. So that can absolutely be a weapon, obviously, in the NFL. I think he's going to need to learn like patience, recognizing holes, recognizing how to sell his runs, things of that nature. But teams will fall in love with attributes for sure. So it's tough to predict what teams could look at him, because again, he's probably going to be very good catching the ball out of the backfield. A lot of teams are looking for those types of backs. That kind of reliability. One problem you have, of course, with relying on rookies to do that is you typically want that third down back to also be a reliable blocker from blitzers, because the quarterback needs to audible them in to stay if they recognize a safety or linebacker blitz, and not a lot of rookies can do that well. So that's always can be a bit of a debate, but he's a dynamic speed back for sure. I would be surprised, particularly as a rookie, that he's making a major fantasy impact, but we'll have to see on the landing spot. I think if you're talking like long term, I wouldn't be surprised, given his attributes, if he learns to be a more patient runner and how to pick his holes and things of that nature. Speed, he has that in droves, and that's something that you can't teach, but the other things are more teachable. So if he can learn those other things, he could be a really good back. But I'd be kind of shocked if that all comes together for him as a rookie. But maybe with the right landing spot, he'll have the opportunity regardless.
So are there any other names that stand out to you as guys that could potentially jump onto a team and perform as a starter right off the bat? Like which of these names do you think that aren't being talked about enough are guys that you think could make a huge impact in their rookie year?
So I'll give you 3 names, and this is more. A lot of this is just due to where they're kind of going in, where they were going in the best ball drafts, their kind of potential role, and just the fact that generally I think they fit better on Underdog. In the first 2, especially, Braylon Allen from Wisconsin, bigger physical back. Aldrich Estime from Notre Dame, really the same type of build. And these guys could just be touchdown hunters. I mean, they could be double-digit touchdown guys. And, when we're talking best ball, you don't necessarily need that week in, week out. But you get those, especially if you're getting them as like 15th, 16th round, 14th, 15th, 16th round guys to be your 4th, 5th back. They might only hit your lineup 4 to 6 times throughout the year. But when they do, it's because they get a touchdown, 50 yards, maybe a 2 touchdown game, and really gain that spike week for you. You're just getting tremendous value there. They can be more complete backs. Again, landing spot's going to matter, as with all these guys, but just having that that touchdown floor, as we've seen with some other backs around the league, can just be really huge for just ensuring that they have some fantasy relevance. And so I really like that for both of them. And the other one that I mentioned, who's and many times not even going drafted, a lot of times I'd take him like 19th, 20th round, Will Shipley from Clemson. He actually can be much more complete back. He ran good times when he was at his pro day. He can catch the ball well. He's a return man in college. Early in his career, he was much more of a touchdown hunter. This last year, Clemson really developed the brotherly shove, as well as they had a bigger physical back paired with him that stole a lot of touchdowns. But he can kind of do it all. I mean, he's not likely to be Christian McCaffrey, but that's what he was. Is he did everything. He returned the ball, returned kicks, caught the ball out of the backfield, ran the ball, was explosive, just did everything you wanted for him. And, I think some team's going to take him. It'll probably be more like a fourth, fifth round pick, but I would not be surprised if he's earning a role and just kind of a complete role, like a little catching the ball, a little running. He succeeded highly well at Clemson, which is obviously a big program. And, I think he is just getting overlooked some because he didn't get to work out at the combine. So I think he's getting overlooked by some people in the fantasy community.
Yeah. So, Steve, let's jump into quarterbacks next. Before we do that, just want to remind everybody, please like the video. Looking for 20 likes to put out a second team video, shorter video a little bit later on after the draft. And also subscribe to the YouTube page. Looking for around 600 subscribers, hopefully by the end of June, let's say. I'm at about 500 right now, so I'm trying to get those numbers up leading into the NFL season. And also, Steve wants to tell you about a simulator product that he has on his site, FanSpeak, called the Ultimate GM. Steve, why don't you tell us a little bit about that and how it can help people sorting through the draft and everything like that?
Sure. The Ultimate GM, it's our premium product of our NFL Draft Simulator. The Ultimate GM adds in the free agency aspect, also allows for trades, including player trades, to trade for picks, as we saw multiple times throughout this offseason. And you pick a team and you run that team's offseason. You do free agent signings, cuts, some restructures, trades, and then ultimately the draft. And the draft is our biggest part of that. And it's obviously relevant here because, a lot of people, it's very easy. And that's why when we talk about some of these quarterbacks and receivers, we're going to have a better idea of, okay, they're going to go to this team or that team. It's usually one or two, maybe three options that we're kind of deciding from. But these running backs, we really have no idea. And that's because they're going to be second, third, fourth rounders. And that's, kind of the real idea of the product is a lot of people are familiar with first round prospects, but it's the second, third, fourth round guys that do make up the bread and butter of a lot of teams, both in real life NFL football and even in fantasy football. I mean, look at last year, we saw guys like Rashee Rice for Kansas City, third round pick, Tank Dell, third round pick, Jaden Reed, second round pick, Sam Laporta, second round pick. These are the types of guys that make a lot of impact. And we do see it with running backs a lot of years. A couple of years ago, for some reason, he fell off the map last year, but Dameon Pierce was a fourth rounder for the Texans, had a really good rookie year. Brian Robinson, third rounder 2 years ago for Washington, came on really strong as a second year guy. So we see these guys hit time in, time out at all positions, essentially. I mean, even quarterback, though we rarely draft it, but look at Brock Purdy. He's a Super Bowl, runner up. So, we do see these guys, and the simulator allows you to find out realistic simulations and just get plausible ideas of who might be available when your team is coming up in these various rounds.
Yeah, definitely a helpful tool. And like I said at the top, there's a lot of sites out there that run simulators, but FanSpeak was one of the original ones, and they have outlasted a lot of these newer sites that have come out with simulators. And they just keep crushing it, and they keep improving on the product. And longevity is huge in this business. When you have longevity, it's kind of a indicator that the tool is working, and it's working well. And so I definitely recommend checking it out over on FanSpeak. Steve, how can they get access to it? Is this a subscription-based thing, or is it something that you offer on a free basis? Like how can they get access to it?
So you can just pick a team and run a draft with our on-the-clock product, and you can even do some of the free agency stuff with the manage cap part of it. The actual Ultimate GM, that is the premium product. You would have to do a subscription, but it's a one-time yearly fee for an entire calendar year, $20. and that also removes the ads as well as allowing the combined free agency draft and trades and some other things. So that is the overall combined product. But if you want to just test out the draft part, since this week's relevant, you can go on there, do it for free. There are ads, but you can just have ads as you're doing your drafts and checking out different simulations.
Cool. Yeah, definitely check that out. And we're going to get into quarterbacks here. Steve, what we were talking at the top of the show or before the show about how some of these quarterbacks are in a bit of uncertainty, especially with the direction that the Commanders are going to go with their pick. It could go several different ways, but let's run through these quarterbacks real quick. What now? I want to know what the ultimate GM is telling you maybe for the ideal spots or kind of what it's projecting for maybe some of these quarterback landing spots. We know Caleb Williams is going to the Bears. Why don't you talk about him a little bit and then get into like some of the uncertainty a little bit?
Yeah, Caleb Williams, no surprise, last year's not this past season, but 2 years ago, Heisman winner at USC. He's been with Lincoln Riley going back to Oklahoma. Slightly undersized, but good size quarterback. Obviously gets a lot of Mahomes comparisons because he does a lot of things, just that seem like magic when it looks like there's nothing open or he's got two defenders on him. He gets out of there and finds an open receiver downfield. But he has all the tools that you want. Enough athleticism, big arm, really can decipher defenses. Outside the Notre Dame game, he was very good with protecting the football. Pinpoint accuracy. Like anyone, he no rookie's perfect, but he develops and is I'd say up there with just about any top prospect quarterback in the last 10 years. I wouldn't put him like as the number one of those, but I'd say he's on par with the Burrows and Trevor Lawrences and all these other guys. So he should make a quick jump to the NFL. And, obviously the Bears have done a nice job last year bringing in DJ Moore. They have Cole Kmet. This year they went out and got Keenan Allen. They have another first-round pick, could be adding another weapon there. So they've done a nice job building a nice landing spot for him.
Yeah, I can't remember a rookie quarterback landing in a better spot than what we see, him landing in, and he's already like a great prospect on top of that. So it could be one of those rare rookie quarterbacks that finds himself in like a top 5 from fantasy finish at the end of the season. Like he's going to be loaded with weapons. Chicago's done a good job of rebuilding that team, and they landed that top spot from a trade they did last year where they were the number 1 pick last year, right, Steve? And they traded it to Carolina for Bryce Young, and they ended up with Bryce Young. So Chicago ended up getting a steal, like in hindsight, in that trade, and now they're going to get Caleb Williams, and they got the number 9 or something overall pick in addition to that. So they got 2 top 10 picks, and it's sad to see what happened with Justin Fields. I thought he was a pretty decent, at least fantasy quarterback, like real life, maybe not so much, but I'm hoping that he gets a good shot on Pittsburgh to be a starter over there. I have a feeling that, knowing our history of Russell Wilson with his conflicts behind the scenes with other players and everything in the locker room, I think that Fields could win that job earlier than people are expecting. I think right now it's Wilson's job, and I think that the team is going to be planning on that going into the season. But I think at any point this offseason, that could turn to Fields. And I think at any point during the season, if it starts with Russell Wilson, it could turn to Fields. But any quick thoughts on that before we go to the next rookie here?
I think the Steelers made a great job getting Fields for an absolute steal, and obviously Wilson for a steal also, since the Broncos are paying his contract. So I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Wilson bounces back in Pittsburgh. I think Mike Tomlin is the ultimate players coach. He's a guy who got Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown to work together and not be, especially Antonio Brown. I mean, we've seen what he did on other situations. So I wouldn't be surprised if they find a way to work things out. And I actually don't mind. I know people, knock Arthur Smith due to his time in Atlanta, but you look at him as an offense coordinator in Tennessee, and that was top 5 offense multiple years with Ryan Tannehill quarterback. And can Russell Wilson replicate what Ryan Tannehill was doing? I think so. And I think they've rebuilt the O-line, and they have a 2-headed backfield. Weapons at tight end and George Pickens, and we'll probably add a receiver in this draft or via trade. So yeah, I mean, I think that offense could be kind of loaded for bear. So it's kind of going to be a soft landing spot for Wilson or maybe Fields. But either way, I like getting Fields they got Fields for less than they trade away Kenny Pickett for. That's always a win. And I don't think you can argue with the way they handled that quarterback situation. Clear upgrades from Pickett and Rudolph for less money than Rudolph got in Tennessee, and less picks than they had to give up for Fields than they got for Pickett.
Yeah, that was a great deal for the Steelers on picking up Fields, and I don't know why the Bears didn't trade him, earlier. Like, I think there was some stuff with Caleb Williams not reporting his medical stuff, and like there was just a bunch of weird stuff with Caleb Williams. I think that was leading to some uncertainty with what Chicago wanted to do for direction, and they kind of they slept on it too long, and they ended up losing, potentially, getting a bigger haul for Justin Fields. It ended up costing them, but they're set up regardless for Williams to come in there and have a decent set of weapons and a decent offense to play with. So that's at least still good. But as far as going to the number 2 quarterback off the board, like, who are you thinking? Which direction do you think the Commanders go in? And who do you think goes number 3? I think 2 and 3 are pretty much interchangeable. But JJ McCarthy is obviously climbing up the boards. I don't think like he would compete with 2 or 3, but like give your thoughts on it, Steve. What do you think's happening with this next group of quarterbacks?
Yeah. So particularly for the Commanders, there's been they brought in McCarthy and they even brought in Michael Penix, but I don't think those were legitimate options at number 2. I think there's more if there's any trade down scenarios. McCarthy maybe to the Patriots at 3 could be in the mix, but probably unlikely. I do think it's likely going to be May and Daniels. And to me, that would be the order that I would take them. And with May going to the Commanders and Daniels likely going to the Patriots or via a trade down scenario. I look at it that May has the much higher upside. He's bigger, stronger, faster, or not faster than Jane Daniels, but bigger, stronger, and still has pretty good mobility. I mean, he obviously gets very much compared to Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, that big like 6'4", 6'5" type quarterback who has a cannon for an arm, can be mobile, pick up a lot of yards on the ground, can be a weapon in the red zone in that department as well. Jane Daniels is, the upside everyone wants him to compare to is Lamar Jackson, but he probably is much closer to Justin Fields. And as you mentioned, Justin Fields is a good fantasy quarterback, but hasn't exactly been a great real life quarterback, as he's been a starter for the Bears the last 2 years, and they had the number 1 overall pick and then the 9th overall pick. And a couple of those wins were by Tyson Bagent this past year. So, Fields has some promise, and I don't think the book's done on him yet, but I think that's what you're looking more with Jane Daniels. I think Daniels has a much higher floor, just because his mobility, he's fairly accurate, but he just doesn't have the strong arm. He's also, he is lighter. Is he going to be able to take the punishment? We've even seen that with Fields. We've seen Fields get injured, every year. And, will Daniels be able to take the punishment? And you watch some of those games, and he was getting absolutely destroyed as he ran the football. And he's just not going to, be able to run that recklessly at the NFL level. So that's going to have to be one thing that's very, very clear going forward. And to me, the number one thing that I look at is Jaden Daniels, like a lot of these guys in recent years, due to COVID and whatnot, is a 5+ year guy in college and finally had this monster breakout. And to take nothing away from him, it was a tremendous, tremendous year. Obviously won the Heisman, but it was also so much of an outlier. He threw 40 touchdowns this year. In his previous essentially 3.5 years, because of the shortened COVID year, he threw 49. So he almost doubled his touchdown production in one season. Just blew away all his other numbers across the board, partly due to some of the receivers we'll be talking about in a little bit. And, Drake May just had his second year in college. So if Jaden Daniels was coming out in his second year, he would be a 6th-round pick, a 7th-round pick. He was just a good runner then. He was not an accurate passer at all. So you look at where Drake May is a second-year guy who was also in a changed offense, didn't have near the elite weapons. And sure, his numbers went down a little bit, but was still very productive. I think if you're taking the guy number 2 overall, I think you got to go with the upside. And this was honestly the same argument when Josh Allen came out. Everyone knew that he was an inaccurate passer. He was not going to hit the ground running in the NFL. In his first couple of years, he struggled. He still made some plays because he's a dynamic playmaker, but he struggled. It took him some time to really develop. And develop he has. And we saw the same thing with Jalen Hurts as well. First couple of years in the NFL, Hurts, he struggled. Again, could make plays with his legs, have some big fantasy days, but he was not a guy you were going to carry that was going to carry a team week in, week out.
Yeah, and that's a good comparison there because, Josh Allen, when he came in, people were iffy on him. Like, they knew that he had a cannon and everything. And when he first, he had that first season, like, people were still iffy on him even after he kind of had those few first explosive games. It took a while for people to come around on Josh Allen, which was kind of surprising, at least in the DFS world. And then that second year, did he get Diggs in his second or third year? When he got connected with Diggs, it was just kind of
he got Diggs in his third year, and that's where his first 2 years he would have in fantasy these like massive ceiling games, these 35-point fantasy games, and for best ball, obviously, like, we love those, but they were not predictable and they were not as repeatable as we'd want. But then when you got Diggs, that's when we really saw more consistency and the much higher floor where almost every game was like 20+ points. So, particularly when you're talking best ball, you're drafting him and you're knowing that even if your number 2 or number 3 quarterback can't beat that, you're still probably getting 18 to 20 points every single week.
I remember I was producing the Swolecast when Josh Allen had his first couple years, and I remember Evan Silva used to be super high on Josh Allen, and people would make fun of him for it. But then, like, look at how that ended up.
Yeah.
He ended up being a stud, and I remember Silva would just be recommending him on the show, and this is where I just remember the hesitancy, like, from the DFS community when he first came out, of people being a little bit skittish about him. But guys like Evan Silva and whoever were just had faith in him or whatever, and then like you said, like, he got Diggs and he just started blowing up. And he loses Diggs this year, so that's going to be interesting to see how they make up for that. But yeah, Diggs on Houston. Houston's going to be a very interesting team, and that's why I'm thinking about doing them as my second team preview this year. But any thoughts on that? Any thoughts of where we see? I know it's a little bit off topic, but what do we see out of Josh Allen in this year without Diggs?
Yeah, and not only Diggs, losing Gabe Davis also, who establishes a solid secondary piece. So I think we're very, very likely to see them taking a receiver probably in the first round this year. But luckily it is a very strong receiver draft. So whatever rookie lands there, that's going to be a great landing spot, and could be something where we take them above a receiver or two goes higher than them, honestly, just because that landing spot could really be so fantastic. But yeah, he's going to need to rely on guys like Khalil Shakir, maybe a lot more 2 tight end sets. Kincaid and Knox, obviously, maybe more James Cook out of the backfield receiving the ball. I do wonder about his sheer upside, without Diggs. And I know some of it was how the offense coordinator shift changed last year. So there is some concern there with taking him, but I mean, he's been so great at fantasy these last 3 years, particularly in best ball, just because the consistency has been off the charts these last 3 years. So yeah, I still like taking him, but it's hard to feel confident right now without a true receiver to rely on.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they added Curtis Samuel, which I think Samuel will be good in that offense. We saw Khalil Shakir have some good moments last year. He's kind of I guess, kind of a similar type of wide receiver. I guess Samuel's more gadgety, but we'll see how they use him in the Bills offense. And they wanted to put a more of an emphasis on running last season, and we saw some good output from James Cook in some moments, but yeah, they're definitely lacking a wide receiver. Like if Khalil Shakir and Curtis Samuel are your top 2 guys, like you got to add something in the draft, because I mean I don't think that they can trade at this point like for anyone noteworthy. So
they just don't have the cap room to do so. Like even if they're willing to give up the pick for, like you hear like Brandon Ayuk might be available or somebody like that, but it's like they don't have the cap room to then sign them.
Yeah, true. You think there'd be any weird trades where the Bills, trade for a wide receiver when their pick is about to come up in the draft?
I'm gonna say no, unless there's something that's done that it's some player that their cap hit is so minimal this first year or two that they can fit them under without being prohibitive to the team. But I think that'd be the only way.
Do you think, like, as far as I'll just mention these rookie wide receivers real quick since we're on this topic. If they are shaping up their team with guys like Khalil Shakir and Curtis Samuel, do you think that Xavier Worthy would be on their radar too? Do you think they're going all speed, or do you think that they want a dominant receiver? And which kind of receiver do you think that would be? Do you think we see like A.D. Mitchell or someone who'd probably be around later in the first round go to them? Like which fit do you see there?
Yeah, I could definitely see them going the more physical guy like a Mitchell, even like a Keon Coleman, a Troy Franklin. Those are typically thought of behind Mitchell, but just in case Mitchell's gone, those are bigger, more physical guys. Like you said, they do want to establish the run. That was one of the things they loved about Gabe Davis, is he's such a good run blocker, that he was like a third tight end out there for them, in blocking sets. So, I could see them prioritizing that because, I mean, Shakir's kind of a tweener guy, and Samuel was clearly mainly a slot gadget guy. So they're extremely, extremely thin at wide receiver. They're probably going to draft 2 in the early rounds, like maybe one in the first, one in the third, or in the fourth, something like that. So, they could have 2 fantasy relevant guys when it's all said and done. But yeah, I mean, if they just feel Worthy is so much better than anyone else on their board, then maybe they still take a shot if, say, Mitchell's off and, some of the other guys in that mix are off the board. But yeah, I think they probably prefer a more bigger physical weapon. And also that kind of like red zone guy. I think they like Kincaid and Knox in the red zone, but you never have enough red zone options, especially with how efficient that offense was moving the ball into the red zone last year.
Yeah, so it'd be interesting to see, which that's why this draft is going to be so interesting, because of all these, like these teams' needs and everything like that. There's a lot of teams that have obvious needs, but there's not obvious players that are going to be there for them in the draft. So there's a lot of uncertainty there. Yeah. But yeah, Steve, jumping back to quarterbacks, what do you think of JJ McCarthy and the JJ McCarthy hype we're hearing here lately?
So here's the issue with JJ McCarthy. There's definitely upside there. I mean, he was highly recruited. has the attributes in arm talent. He's smaller and needs to bulk up. And he did a little bit for the combine, but we just not actually seen him play at that weight, and probably needs to even bulk up even more. My biggest concern with JJ McCarthy, particularly when we're talking from a best ball perspective, is of all these quarterbacks we're talking about, he's probably the least likely to make an impact as a rookie. Probably the least likely to make an impact in his first couple of years in the NFL, because he doesn't have the rushing floor that guys like May, obviously Daniels, Nix, even Penix to an extent, and Williams has. I mean, McCarthy has some mobility, but he's just probably, we're probably thinking like 300-400 yards rushing, 3 to 4 touchdowns, not 700-800 yards rushing, 7 to 10 touchdowns like some of these other guys. So, he's not going to add you there. This is a guy who threw 300 yards in a game in college maybe 3 or 4 times in his 2.5 years as a starter, which also included college playoffs, so more games than most quarterbacks had. So do we really think he's going to come into the NFL and just jump in and be throwing 300 yards week in, week out? No, I think he's, he was not a guy who carried his team through the air in college. I mean, in one of the biggest games against Penn State, he threw the ball like 1 time in the second half. I mean, I don't think he cracked 100 yards in that game. They won the game. That's what was important. But, and this is not anything to take away from long term, just saying from a fantasy perspective, I would just be very, very shocked if we're talking a year from now and JJ McCarthy is a guy who, had a lot of quality games. I would not be surprised if he sits a fair amount as a rookie, maybe half a year, maybe even more. Could depend on the landing spot, but like honestly, if he goes to, we've seen him tied to a number of different teams, but even a team like the Giants, who there's been some buzz about them wanting JJ McCarthy, they still might just give Daniel Jones the role to start. I mean, they did that when they drafted Daniel Jones. Eli Manning had the first couple games, so I would just be more wary on McCarthy than any of these other rookies, to be honest.
When you said the Giants, I just pictured him and Zach Wilson over in the Jets, like being like the New York Twins. Like they look exactly alike, man. And then both of them playing in New York would be pretty funny, especially if he has the same results as Zach Wilson over there. But so are there any other of these rookie quarterbacks that you think are going to be fantasy relevant in year one? I know you mentioned Bo Nix, but I know there's a couple other names floating around, but is there any that you think are worthy of mentioning?
So to me, Michael Penix, most recently at Washington, obviously college football playoffs, just tremendous arm talent. Probably the most talented arm in this draft class. Him or May has the best deep ball, consistent, accurate deep ball, and also early in his career at Indiana, before he had a number of injuries, he was a dynamic runner. One would compare him to a Jane Daniels, but he had these injuries, and his last couple of years at Washington didn't really run. At his pro day, he ran his 40 and he ran like a 4.6. I mean, he still has the wheels. So yeah, I mean, I don't think an NFL team is going to let him, run 150 times, but he's going to pick up some yards. He's going to pick up some key touchdowns for you. And as we saw with CJ Stroud, you don't even need, if your arm is that good, you can get the job done almost entirely through the air and be a fantasy relevant rookie. So obviously highly experienced because of the injuries. He had like 6 years in college, but I want the accurate passer, and I also think he could get a really good landing spot. I mean, what if the Vikings don't? We'll have to see it come draft day, but what if the Vikings don't end up getting the trade up for one of these bigger names, end up with Michael Penix, and maybe he beats out Sam Darnold, and you have him throwing to Jefferson, Hawkinson when he's back, and of course Jordan Addison. Or even the Raiders, and he beats out Gardner Minshew, and he's throwing to Devontae Adams. He could end up with even one of the best landing spots compared to some of these other rookies. So I really like Penix a lot. I think the only reason he's not in a mix for a higher pick is he's a little older and he has a very high injury history. But I think he's still likely to go in the first round. And yeah, he's probably not a 15-year quarterback option in the NFL. But some teams could look at him as a guy who's much more NFL ready than some of these other guys. And, yeah, we maybe only get 6-7 years out of them, but they could be pretty productive 6-7 years.
So there's been talk of Minnesota potentially trading up in this draft to get a quarterback. If they trade up, who do you think they would be trading up for?
I think they'd love either May or Daniels. I probably wouldn't mind McCarthy, and they probably feel like Sam Darnold can, and this would be another reason where, McCarthy probably would not be starting above Sam Darnold, at least early in the year, maybe late in the season. But yeah, I mean, I think their ideal would be to get the high upside of May or the dynamic playmaking ability of Daniels. McCarthy offers a little of both, but is less certain than May, and probably not as a high upside and not as near dynamic playmaker as Daniels. So I think they would love to get one of those top four guys. Obviously, Williams is off the board, so I guess one of the next three. But I wouldn't be surprised if they don't find any trade takers and have to get stuck with a guy like Penix. I think they're still taking a quarterback.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a pretty. Obviously, it's a pretty critical need for them after losing Kirk Cousins, obviously, and then landing Sam Darnold. I mean, Sam Darnold, he might be serviceable for a few games, but he's going to be seeing ghosts eventually out there. So you got to kind of be careful with your quarterback situation if that's the case. And Justin Jefferson is too good of a weapon on his. Is he still? He's not on his rookie contract still, is he?
He's at the end. He's essentially, as far as I know, he's not. I don't think he's totally shut down negotiations, but he'd made comments about wanting to see what the Vikings are doing at quarterback before signing a long-term deal. And I think he really wanted them to keep Cousins. And that was a big reason why they offered they were, pretty close in the Cousins mixes to probably keep Jefferson happy. So that's why I think they need to come away with a quarterback here, because I don't know if Jefferson's signing a long-term deal if Darnold is the guy all season,
No, you can't blame him for that either, because it's like, why waste your career on a rebuild? Like it's like you see it happen with these stud wide receivers. They end up finishing their career without any, like Super Bowl hopes, because they ended up getting stuck on rebuilds or whatever reason. So Jefferson is definitely smart with keeping his options open there, and be interesting to see how that plays out. But so any other quarterbacks you want to mention, Steve, or do you want to jump on over to wide receivers?
So the only thing I'll say, and this is, now we're looking at landing spot here, is what do the Broncos do? Raiders also to an extent, and maybe that is one of the guys we've already mentioned, but the Broncos, they don't have a quarterback. They don't have a quarterback right now in place, and they could be in a full rebuild, but there's been some talk that they trade up. So I'll be interested to see where they go, and if they land one of these guys. They're also a team that could maybe just trade back in late in the first round because they need stockpile picks, because they've given up picks in the Russell Wilson and Sean Payton deals, and maybe they end up with a guy like Bo Nix. That's not the most sexy, biggest name out there, but Bo Nix had a lot of time in college and probably could enter in and be their starter and maybe be solid with them. So that's the type of landing spot for him that would I wouldn't mind taking a shot on him late, if that's what it ends up.
One of the less talked about things was Russell Wilson had from a stats perspective, on a lot of these stats, had almost a career best year last year. And it goes overlooked a lot because the really bad year he had the previous year and everything. But
Yeah.
Russell Wilson, from a stats perspective, had a pretty decent year last year under Peyton. So whichever rookie ends up on that team is set up well with the coaching staff that can lead them to some success at least.
Oh no, sorry, I was just finishing up on the Broncos and say I know there's talk that they may trade Cortland Sutton, but if not, that's a decent wide receiver room with Mims and Josh Reynolds and Dulcich if he's ever healthy. So could have decent weapons there.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So if we're looking at wide receivers here, obviously the top pick is looking like Marvin Harrison. Now, Marvin Harrison obviously is like a physical stud. He's had success in college. But is there that much of a gap between him and Malik Neighbors that Harrison is considered like a lock to be the first wide receiver off the board, or do you see things differently there, Steve?
So I do believe Harrison will be the first wide receiver off the board, but I don't think there's a big gap. I think Neighbors and honestly even Rome Odunze. I mean, people thought it was just Neighbors as the 1B, but Odunze went into the combine and he's bigger size and he ran extremely well, caught everything. He did every drill, including like the short shuttles and 3-cone stuff like that a lot of receivers don't do. And he had really good times there, especially for his size. So he just showed he can be complete X. He can be complete number one receiver. And both of those guys would be Neighbors and Dunze would be essentially the top receiver off the board in almost any other draft class we're talking about. I mean, sure, maybe like Jamar Chase would have gone above them here or there. But for instance, a couple of years ago, which ended up being a pretty good group when you get guys like Drake London and Garrett Wilson, I think both Neighbors and Dunze are probably going above them. So that just gives a kind of and clearly above anyone last year. So yeah, Harrison will probably still be the top guy taken. Maybe somebody falls in love, because of trade ups or whatever the case may be, with Neighbors or something, and would jump and take him first. But yeah, I think you have 3 essential elite receivers at the top of this draft class.
I think this is where it gets interesting as far as a underdog perspective with ADP. Because if we're looking at these rookie receivers, we're seeing Marvin Harrison going at a 15.5 ADP. That puts him, like right on the outskirt of the first round, like for a rookie wide receiver. And like we didn't even see that with Jamar Chase like a few years ago, and he was one of the most like hyped prospects in a while. Marvin Harrison, he's got name value. Obviously, his dad was a stud receiver for Peyton Manning back in the day. But yeah, it's kind of goes to what I was asking you about, like the gap between him and maybe some of these other receivers. Is it because of because of his name value? Is it like, I wonder what is causing him to separate? Because we see Malik Neighbors, he's at 26. Rome Odunze, you mentioned, he's my favorite guy out of these rookie wide receivers to draft because he's going at 45. So at least with him, you're getting him in the 4th round, which seems more reasonable. And if you saw him at the combine, like I was impressed with his work ethic, like taking that extra time to do those reps on that drill, even though, like it was after everybody was gone. He was still sitting there doing it, trying to beat that time. Like, I like that type of attitude, especially in, like one of these wide receivers. He chose to participate in all the drills where Neighbors and, Harrison, they didn't want to lose their spot in the draft. They almost have like 1 and 2, not guaranteed, but they have it pretty well set in. But I think Neighbors did himself a disservice by not, taking place in it, where Odunze has found himself now, being talked about as potential second wide receiver off the board. What are your thoughts there, Steve?
No, I agree. I thought Odunze, that was kind of, and this is the thing, like people questioned, does he have that like truly elite speed? Does he have that elite quickness? We know he dominated at Washington, and we knew he had the size over Neighbors, and the size was comparable to Harrison. But he went out there and showed it. He absolutely showed that he had the speed, the quickness, the work ethic, like you said, did every drill, did everything. And he said, I'm going to go out and earn it. And that's, coaches are going to love that. And, especially teams that, if their quarterbacks have any say in the matter, they're going to love that because they know that receiver is going to be out there working with them every day. So, yeah, I think Odunze absolutely helped himself. Neighbors, yeah, whether it will hurt him or not, we'll see. But I agree. I think Odunze answered any question there is about him, and he's, like I said, he's on par. He would have been first receiver, I think, taken a couple years ago with guys like Wilson and London, who, as you show, are being taken above him right now. And granted, now they have better quarterback situations than they did as rookies, but still, the case being that they're really good. And we don't know. Odunze might land with a pretty good quarterback. What to see? I think the one thing that Marvin Harrison does have right now going for him is, with the general expectation that he's essentially a lock to the Cardinals outside of trade back scenarios. And he's been working some with Kyler Murray. So we've seen, now granted, this is a newer Cardinals offense than what we saw before with Hopkins, but we know Kyler Murray can lead to a number one receiver. And that should be Marvin Harrison Jr. So that pairing feels really good. Now, honestly, the next receiver could go to the Chargers and Justin Herbert, who, as we've seen, has led to a lot of number one receiving years. So, maybe it's a moot point. I think the concern that some people have is obviously if, say, the Giants take a receiver, are we feeling confident that Daniel Jones can produce a fantasy output for Neighbors or Odunze on par with what, say, Murray would do with Harrison? And that's kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah, and that's a worst case scenario for any of these receivers, landing in a spot like that. And that's one thing, that's one thing that kills. Look at Wilson. Wilson landed in a a shitty spot for a wide receiver, and he's going into year 3, and he's had solid years, but he really, this will be the first real look that we get at him 3 years into his career. Assuming that Aaron Rodgers is going to be, healthy and, playing at a a decent level this year.
It's so important to have a quarterback.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's everything for these guys. And it makes a huge difference where the landing spot is. And these ADPs, if we see a guy like Neighbors go to the Giants, then you can expect to see Neighbors drop to probably in the 50s as far as ADP, or maybe the 40s. And I think with Odunze, if one of these guys lands on the Chargers, right now I think it's between one of the wide receivers or Alt. And honestly, the way that the Chargers just got rid of their 2 top wide receivers, I know that Harbaugh has a more of a run friendly offense. At least that's my understanding of it. So it'll be interesting to see if they decide to go with that offensive lineman, or if they head in the wide. But they are desperately in need of a wide receiver.
Yeah, absolutely. So no, these landing spots are going to be crucial. And here's where the other thing is, these trade ups for these other teams searching for that likely fourth quarterback, since if it does go 1, 2, 3 and no trade ups in those first 3 picks, and if the Cardinals just say we're taking our receiver here, making Kyler Murray happy, then that Chargers pick could be quarterback central for teams looking to jump the Giants for JJ McCarthy. So maybe the Chargers aren't taking there. Maybe the Vikings have moved up. And then the Chargers are looking at a receiver at 11. And they could get Odunze at 11, and we're talking Rome Odunze might even be better than Marvin Harrison, from that perspective. So, it really could end up being wild. That's just one example, but it really is landing spot. And a perfect example, honestly, is Justin Jefferson, to take nothing away from him, obviously extremely talented receiver in his own right, but he went to a landing spot with the Vikings and, Kirk Cousins, a good quarterback, and all these other receivers who went ahead of him, many of them went to much worse landing spots with quarterbacks. And that's why Justin Jefferson has just been dunking on the rest of the receivers from his class. Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt he's extremely, extremely talented, but he's had a quarterback. We saw last year when he came back from injury without Cousins, he's not the same player. It's just quarterback absolutely matters. And it's going to matter for the landing spots for these rookies as well.
Yeah, and while we're sitting here looking at these underdog ADPs, I just want to remind viewers to please, do a underdog account, open up an underdog account, use the promo code SEEK, SEEK, and Underdog is going to match you up to $100 on your first deposit. And that is going to help you out because we have Best Ball Mania right around the corner. The latest iteration of Best Ball Mania is coming after the draft. And this is what we're getting prepared for. We're just getting a look at these rookies. For me, it hasn't really made a lot of sense to draft over the past month just because we're getting so close at this point. We've got a bunch of information at this point with free agency, and we're really just looking to see where these rookies are going to end up. So that's why I kind of take a pause, once we get the free agency results until the rookie draft is over, because we need to know a few more of these pieces before we have a better understanding of how this ADP is going to shake out. And I think the attempts to project free agency gives you a decent amount of value with drafting. But once that free agency is sorted out and we're just now onto rookies, we don't know how these rookies are going to affect the free agencies, the free agents' new spots. We don't know how the free agents are going to, affect teams' draft decisions just yet. Well, we have a better idea of how teams' draft decisions are going to go based on free agency, but there's still a lot of uncertainty. To me, it makes a lot more sense to wait until after the draft, until we start getting heavy into drafting, or at least dipping our toes into it. So we're in the perfect spot where we have an expert on rookies on the show with Steve, talking about these rookies, giving us an overview. So we're prepared when the draft happens this week. It happens on Thursday, I believe, is when the draft starts. So we're a few days away from all this stuff going down, and we'll have a better idea of how this ADP is going to shake out probably within a week. And we'll know who we want to go after. And you're going to want to get your initial deposit into your Underdog account so that you can play around with some of these early drafts and take advantage of some value. If you think that some rookies landed in a good landing spot that haven't been on people's radars, and you can certainly take advantage of that if you're more familiar with the situation, which is what Steve is helping us become right now. So Steve, if we move on past Rome Odunze and we hit the next tier of wide receivers here, who is the first guy on your next tier of wide receivers?
To me, it's Brian Thomas Jr., the other LSU receiver. And this, again, shows, Jaden Daniels, not taking anything truly away from him, but he just had two really elite receivers. Thomas, 6'3", 220, ran a 4.3, 540, like just lightning fast, deep ball guy, jump ball guy, red zone, does all that to be an outside X receiver. Only 1 full year as a starter and highly productive this past season, but just absolutely blew up, for LSU and shredded the SEC this year. So despite the lack of total production, I still think he's NFL ready. I think he shows enough traits to hit the ground running. And yeah, I mean, I think he should be the fourth receiver taken in this class. I think he would have been comparable and would have been in the mix to be the first receiver taken in last year's draft class. That's kind of the range that he was in, just because he's just more athletically gifted than JSN or Addison, even Quentin Johnson and Flowers. So He's the type of guy that could really, at the very worst, should be able to be a number 2 receiver on a team, and could be a number 1 receiver on some teams.
Yeah, I feel like he's climbed up in ADP since the last time I seen him. Right now, I see him at 66.8 ADP. I think when we were drafting earlier in the year, he was going in the hundreds. Am I right on that, Steve?
I definitely remember him like 80s and 90s. He might have been in the 100 at one point, but yeah, after the combine, he had a great combine, and I think that really cemented him as the 4th receiver. Because at one point it was like, will it be Keon Coleman? Will it be Troy Franklin? They didn't have as strong combines, and maybe even slipped out of the first round. Thomas, I think, is absolutely cemented as the 4th receiver. Most likely, obviously, anything can happen, and very likely a top 20-ish pick. So just the draft capital was probably higher. Could be top 15 guy. So yeah, I think that's really helped him with that. And I think just as more attention's been paid to Jaden Daniels, I think people are watching these video clips and seeing, oh yeah, that's Malik Neighbors, but that's also Brian Thomas just tearing it up against the SEC week in, week out.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I swear, because like when I last did a draft, I think it was before the combine. When Meg and I jumped on a show, I can't remember if we did it before or after the combine, but yeah, it was guys like Brian Thomas were going a little bit later.
Oh yeah,
I think it feels like, yeah, it feels like some of these other guys moved up. Like Harrison definitely moved up because he wasn't at the top end of the second round. He was closer to the back end of it. And Neighbors, he's probably about where he was. But then you got Odunze. He feels like he moved up a little bit. I felt like I was drafting him in like every draft, that I could early on, just because what we talked about, like it's just kind of perspective on people's perspectives on these players and the name value of Harrison, all the talk on Harrison versus Neighbors when you got Odunze, who's not that far behind those guys, but he's going at a significant gap in value where you could get like value on him. I think we were seeing the same type of value there with quarterback too, because Caleb Williams was not going very, very high early on. Let's see where he's at now. Caleb Williams is at 104 ADP. So what's that? That's probably the ninth round or so. So, Caleb Williams, 8th, 9th round, somewhere in there. Caleb Williams still going pretty late, I think, relative to his upside, especially knowing that he's going to Chicago. So other guys that are around Caleb Williams right now, we got Brock Purdy ahead of him. We got Kyler Murray is now ahead of him. Kyler Murray was going pretty late, but people caught on with Kyler Murray's value. And then, after him, we see Justin Herbert's taken a major dip since we were last drafting, or since I was last drafting. Jaden Daniels, he feels like a pretty good value relative to what we know about him. He's likely to have a pretty decent starting role this year. So yeah, some of these rookies are, as far as the quarterbacks, I see some value there. I see some expensive guys on the wide receiver end, but I do see some value there as well with, obviously Odunze and Thomas has gotten a little bit more expensive, but let's move on to the next guy that you'd like to talk about for wide receivers. Steve, who's the next guy on your list here?
So I think it has gotten murky after Thomas. It was earlier on. People were kind of sliding in like Troy Franklin and Keon Coleman. Like I said, neither one had a tremendous combine. And I don't think that totally eliminates either one from being even a first rounder, but or even an early second rounder. But I think they have moved down. I think the combine performances of Donnie Mitchell and Xavier Worthy, Lad McConkey, add in also his Senior Bowl performance, have probably pushed them all maybe above them, those two. those two names, as kind of mentioned before when we were talking about the Bills, Worthy, he just set the combine record for 40 time. There's just no way to deny that. And sure, we can say he was undersized. He cut weight for it, whatever. I mean, the guy is lightning fast. He is lightning in a bottle. Put the ball in his hands and just let him fly. Whether it's in the punt return game, whether it's, on screens, whether it's deep ball. Does he need refinement? 100%. But he's going to be a playmaker. He's going to be a weapon. No question about that. And especially if what a lot of people like from a fantasy perspective is that late first round area, you're maybe pairing him with Josh Allen, maybe pairing him with Patrick Mahomes. Those are good guys to pair him with. That type of thing. And you could get something, just dynamic quarterbacks with the arm to get the ball deep to them, as well as just offenses that we know that the opportunity will be there. There are some other later round teams. Dallas could maybe look at receiver. A few others that have been some talks here or there. There have been some talks that 49ers could trade because of just financially trade Ayuk, but then automatically replace him with another first round receiver. Don't know if that will happen, but I've seen reports like that out there. So we'll kind of obviously have to see where these guys land, but I like all three of these guys. Worthy is the speed guy. Donnie Mitchell, speed, but more physical. He does need to definitely work on like route refinement and being a more complete receiver. But he's like 6'4", big physical guy, played at Georgia before Texas with Worthy this past year. And, can also, I think, make an impact as a rookie. And then Ladd McConkey is probably the best route runner in this draft class. Very fast, dealt with some injury issues at Georgia, but we saw at the Senior Bowl, we saw at the Combine, just the smoothest route runner, some of the best hands in this class. Love the idea of obviously pairing him with potentially a Mahomes or Josh Allen or somebody like that as well. So, landing spot will matter as to their actual value, but add to the mix them and then guys like Keon Coleman ran a really poor 40 time. I think it was like 4.6, something like that. But as we saw in college, he just makes plays. It kind of reminds people of like an Anquan Bolden who ran like a 4.7 40 time back in the day. He just gets open, and he doesn't need the biggest window to get open because he'll jump up and go get it. He'll snag the ball in contested coverage, and probably never going to be like a true elite number one receiver, but a good solid number two receiver. Troy Franklin, deep ball guy at Oregon, 6'3", didn't always use his size to his advantage. I was disappointed some in his short area quickness at the Combine, and his route running was a little not as crisp as I would have liked. But I still think highly productive player at Oregon the last couple of years can be a good starting receiver in the NFL. So that's the mix of like the late first, early second that I think you're looking at. But guys who are going to be fantasy relevant, particularly if they find the right landing spots.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things about Xavier Worthy is, he's obviously a speed guy, and a lot of the speed guys that we've seen in the past have fizzled out in the NFL. But Xavier Worthy seems like a much more refined player than some of these other speed guys that we've seen in the past. Would you put him more in with Tyreek Hill or with like just one of those fast guys that fizzled out?
Yeah, like obviously the guy whose record he broke, John Ross, never did anything in the NFL. I think he, obviously Tyreek Hill is a very high comparison. One early comp, I knew he'd be faster than him from 40 time perspective, but one just from a size comp that I liked Worthy to, because I really liked Worthy even before his 40 time. I had him ranked higher than Donnie Mitchell and some of these other guys, just because I see just the explosive athlete, the playmaking ability. He reminds me of Zay Flowers. You get the ball in his hands and he just makes plays. He's got more natural speed than Zay. Zay definitely a better like route runner. I think did better at like creating space for himself. So, you know, if you could combine those two things, you actually have Tyreek Hill. But he just kind of like from size and ability to make plays with the ball in his hands, just remind me a lot of Zay Flowers. And I see as a late first, early second type guy who can produce early, just get the ball in his hands, whether it's screens, short slants, you know, some deep balls, get the ball in his hands. Good things are going to happen. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Xavier Worthy. You're going to have some
Yeah, and
lapses in route running, some drops, but other than that, you're going to get a playmaker.
yeah, and you mentioned you know, Kansas City and Buffalo, you know, being potential fun landing spots. That's why I was thinking of that Tyreek comparison, because if you get
Yeah.
him in Kansas City and you got Marquise Brown and Xavier Worthy, all of a sudden you're talking about a completely different Kansas City team than we've seen in the last, you know, since Tyreek left, basically, where it was like Travis Kelce or bust. We saw a little bit of Rashee Rice emerging last year. And, you know, if he's able to continue that, I don't know what the situation is going to be like with a suspension with him, with that auto situation that he got himself into. But if you're starting the year with Xavier Worthy and, you know, Marquise Brown as your two wideouts, and, you know, Travis Kelce, you know, working those shorter routes. He was working a lot of wideouts, wide routes last season, Travis Kelce, because of the need for it. But like, it's going to be interesting situation with the Chiefs this year if they end up with one of these, you know, dynamic, speedy receivers in the draft in that first round. And I don't know. Like, is that the indication, Steve? Is that the direction that they're likely to go?
So yeah, no, I think, and just to first touch about what that kind of speed element and dynamic adds is, you know, Kelsey's been extremely good. You know, he was tight end 1-2 years ago and by a wide margin, and still had very good production last year. But as we've seen, defenses just totally focus on him because their other threats are Sky Moores and MVS and these other guys who, even if they get open, aren't catching the football. Where now you're adding guys like Marquise Brown and potentially a Worthy or some other late round receiver like this, and you know the threat is going to be much higher, and it can open up Kelsey to be even better, more effective weapon, which of course opens up that entire offense. So yeah, I mean that should be the direction they go. You know, I think the Chiefs could go offensive line as well, but just because it's a very deep offensive line draft, and the other thing that they want to do is always keep Mahomes upright because they know they're going to win as long as Mahomes is healthy. But yeah, getting him a weapon, I'm guessing is going to be a priority. And you know, they added Marquise Brown, but that was not like a long-term fix. And they've done these mid-round picks like Sky Moore and Rice. Moore has obviously been a complete bust, and like you said, Rice with the legal troubles, who knows? So yeah, I think a first round receiver, Worthy, McConkey, Adonai Mitchell, even because maybe they do want some more size, and Mitchell's can get after deep as well. Those would probably be the three most likely options.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, it's going to be interesting. And Worthy, by the way, has shot way up on the, like, I haven't,
Oh,
like I
yeah.
said, like I haven't really been looking since the combine, but he's up to 94. So he is shot way up. So expectations are high for Xavier Worthy, almost to the point where, you know, like he's he's definitely not a value anymore. But I don't think that there's a lot of upside with him with the, as far as ADP. You know, like hopefully he lands in a good spot and he does well, you know, like as a player, but like for fantasy ADP, I don't know if I'd be I mean, I'll probably have some exposure to him just because he seems like a fun player to draft, but you know, I probably won't have overexposure to him at that price. What are your thoughts there, Steve?
Well, I think it all depends on the landing spot. I mean, if he is on one of these teams that we talk about with these
Yeah.
top end quarterbacks, even if it is like Dallas, like, you know, Dallas could be moving on from Gallup, Brandon Cooks could move to a tertiary role, you know, and Worthy's their second guy to Lamb and like a speed threat to Lamb, yeah, you know, that could be fine. But yeah, if he ends up in Carolina, at the top pick of the second round, that's not great. So yeah, and I think like we saw last year. I mean, Rashee Rice was a third round pick. He was a much better fantasy asset than Cedric Tillman, who was a third round pick on the Browns. Jalen Hyatt, who was a third round pick and who was way more hyped up on the Giants. Why? Because he had Patrick Mahomes and, well, he's more NFL ready also. But I think if the landing spot's right, it's gonna be more. It'll be palatable there to take them in, around 100.
Very interesting dynamics we got going on in ADP right now. So yeah, I'm definitely going to be drafting when this Best Ball Mania comes on the board, so I can get a better idea of if a lot of these new landing spots make sense, and as far as ADP, if it makes sense as well. So we can move on to tight end right now. Steve, I'm going to remind people, just hit that like button, looking for 20 likes to put out a short video. Make sure to check out FanSpeak over on their YouTube page as well. Steve, is there any content that you'd like to plug over there?
Just we're going to be, keep updating some of the big boards for on the clock portion of Ultimate GM. That's the other thing, is you can choose different big boards to draft from, to try different scenarios. We'll be doing that right up to the draft, and then after the draft, we're going to be doing a lot more of our own best ball content, and some of our other tools. So just keep an eye out. But yeah, we're going to be doing a lot on our YouTube page with drafts and other content related to best ball as well.
So we can move on to tight end now, and I think the one name that stands out the most is obviously Brock Bowers. There's talk about him potentially going in the top 10 or very early in the draft. And I mean, you can't name your kid with any other expectations of him being a tight end when you name him Brock, except for, maybe Brock Purdy escaped and he became a quarterback. But, Brock Bowers is the ideal tight end name, and it's showing in his draft capital, like getting drafted early in this thing, likely. So what do you think on the tight end situation, Brock Bowers, and is there anyone else, any other names that you want to mention in the tight end space?
Yeah, so let me talk about Bowers first. Bowers is, like you said, he's going to be the first round tight end drafted this year. Definitely the only first round tight end, and top 15 essentially for sure. Very potentially likely top 10, and he's extremely talented. I mean, 3 years he just dominated Georgia. Won 2 national championships, was a big part of the national championship teams. People will, there are the combine photos of him standing next to Rob Gronkowski and people talking about the size difference there. But you look at Bauer's size, and his size is essentially the exact same as Sam Laporta. Sam Laporta was tight end 1 last year as a rookie. So, unlike Sam Laporta, you're not going to get the value discount, because even late in the offseason, Sam Laporta was going as like tight end 14, 15. Bowers right now is going as tight end 9. And if he gets the right landing spot, could even jump to tight end 6, 7. But he does have the potential to be tight end 1. That's the type of talented weapon receiving tight end that he is. Is he as athletically talented and dynamic as, say, Kyle Pitts? No, but he is a very strong route runner. He is athletically gifted. He should be a top target on whatever team is drafting him. I mean, hopefully he's going to a team that will throw the ball enough and prioritize him enough that he will be effective. But if so, he could pay off this ADP. I know it's high for a rookie, and especially when you see guys like David Njoku and Jake Ferguson going kind of after him. But what I will say is he does have that kind of upside, and the tight end position is a little thinner right now. When you have situations like TJ Hawkinson coming off an injury, we don't know when he'll be back. There's a couple teams that, like Green Bay might be kind of a split tight end with the 2 rookies they had last year, Musgrave and Kraft. A few other teams, their quarterback situation is a little up in the air right now. We don't have a lot of confidence in Cleveland. That's honestly one of the reasons why Njoku is not going as high. I mean, Watson's going to have that job back, and they weren't as effective with Watson as they were with Flacco down the stretch. So, those are the types of things that are, of course, weighing into all the situation. And Bowers, if he ends up in a terrible situation, yeah, he's probably not worth being tight end 9. But if he ends up in a great situation, I probably have no problem taking him as tight end 8, 9, 10, that range. So yeah, I think he is easily going to be worthy a top 10 pick in the NFL draft, and probably worthy being a top 10 tight end in underdog drafts. As for the second part, when you talked about other tight ends, to me, there's only one other one that I truly like and have really been drafting, and that's Ja'Tavion Sanders. Right now, he's going as tight end 29 from Texas, probably second round type guy. We'll have to see what the landing spot is. Is he even going to get enough work to be effective? But he is the type who, if he goes to a tight end needy team, could step in and be their pass catching tight end. Do I think he's going to come out and have a 1,000-yard year and put up numbers like a Sam Laporta last year? No, I don't think so. But he can be a dynamic playmaking tight end for sure, and could be your your tight end 3 that you're drafting and fill in for bye weeks, for injuries, give you a couple floor games, maybe a ceiling game if you're lucky. It's not great, and you're going to need a good landing spot up, of course, but I think he's talented enough to do it. There's a few other guys like Ben Sinnott from K-State or Cade Stover from Ohio State. Again, if they get the perfect landing spot, maybe they'll be fantasy worthy, but likely it's probably going to be on a poor offense or something like that. And best case scenario, they're just your third tight end who fills in for a bye week or an injury week every now and then, and really aren't guys that I'm drafting right now until I see that they get a landing spot worthy of being drafted.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. Like, if Brock Bowers was in last year's draft, where would you have placed him, do you think? If this year's version of Brock Bowers was in last year's draft, where do you think you would have placed him relative to all those stud rookie tight ends?
Oh, easily. He easily was ahead of all of them. And last year was also interesting, is he would have been drafted ahead of all the receivers taken last year.
Yeah, definitely significant, because Steve was very high on all those rookie tight ends last year. So to have him say that he likes Brock Bowers, potentially have been the top tight end in the class last year, then that's a pretty good endorsement. Gives you a pretty good idea of what he thinks of Brock Bowers this year. I was just going to point out, like with Brock Bowers, he's getting drafted ahead of Njoku, who we saw had his breakout year last year, or verge of a breakout, I guess. Jake Ferguson, like we always see Dak leaning on tight end, and Dallas Goedert. Those are some of the big names. We also saw Schultz do pretty well last year. Hawkinson's coming off an ACL. We don't even know, what his playing situation is going to be. But some big names that he's ahead of already. But like, it definitely can give you some confidence in drafting him if Steve is so high on him being in this spot. He might even be a value. Do you think he's a value here, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where his landing spot's going to be so key, because, for instance, it could be, again, a team like the Chargers, especially if it's them trading back, say, that Minnesota trade scenario I gave earlier, the 11th pick. Maybe they take Brock Bowers at the 11th spot, and he's their number one weapon. He's their Travis Kelce. So, yeah, sign me up, and then that could really be a value. And Justin Herbert's just peppering them every game with 10 plus targets, like we see prime Kelce. So yeah, I mean, that's the type of thing we'd be looking for. If he goes to Denver and they don't have a quarterback, I'm not as thrilled. So it's really going to depend on the landing spot, and that's why at the end of the day, even though Kincaid went higher, I liked Laporta more, because I thought the landing spot was better, a little bit better, just because there's a clear picture that Laporta was just going to be, not splitting the role with Knox like Kincaid was, and just would have a very sizable role. So I do want to see the landing spot before I truly sign off on the ninth spot. Where he is right now, I will say, all things being equal, like I'm not trying to do a stack, I would typically take Jake Ferguson over him. But that was the only tight end of the ones you mentioned behind him that I have been taking over him, just because Njoku, I just don't know if I trust Watson to bounce back and keep Njoku's numbers running like Flacco did down the stretch.
I was expecting Njoku to have a better season last year because it seemed like a couple years ago when Watson was playing towards the end of the season that he was getting some kind of a rhythm with Njoku. So I was expecting Njoku to have a decent season last year. But, like you said, like he didn't sync up with Watson at all. And it took Flacco to kind of unlock him towards the end of the season. So definitely was a disappointing, first half of the season, but he probably did you pretty well in the playoffs if you had Njoku. So, so, I mean, other than that, Bowers seems pretty interesting. Like you said, it's going to be all dependent on what the landing spot is. And obviously that's going to be huge for most of these guys that we talked about today. And, hopefully this show gave everybody a good, primer for the draft coming up later this week. So you know who to look out for, and you're just hoping that they land in good spots. If any of these guys lands in a good spot, which ones will have the best, chances of outperforming their ADP and stuff like that. So make sure to follow that draft closely and pay attention to where these guys are landing, because that's ultimately going to be what determines their value. And before we sign off, Steve, you got any overview thoughts on the upcoming draft? What do people what do you want them to take away the most on what to be looking at?
So I think the prime thing that I would say is believe the hype with this receiver class. I think this is combined. Not only do you have the top end receiver talent, like we talked in depth about, but it's deep. This is a deep receiver class. So put this together, and this is probably the best wide receiver class we've seen in 10 plus years. And I think a lot of fantasy relevance will come from it. And it also doesn't hurt that there are a lot of teams with really good quarterbacks, both early in the draft, like Kyler Murray and Justin Herbert needing some weapons, and then late in the draft, guys like Mahomes and Josh Allen and a few others who could use some receivers. So a lot of these receivers will probably end up in really good landing spots. And most of them are pretty ready to go. So don't be surprised if, we fast forward to the end of the season and a number of rookies are in the top 20, 25 receivers fantasy wise. I don't know if we're going to have even one of the top guys being a true number one, but you're going to have a lot of good fantasy rookie receivers. So keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on those landing spots. And if they're getting paired up with some of these top end quarterbacks, I'd be aggressive grabbing them because I think they can really hit the ground running.
Yeah, for sure. Like I'm going to be drafting a lot more, rookie wide receivers this year than I have in the past. And I do think that the rookie wide receivers are going to open up your entire macro strategy this season, because I think that the running backs, like we were talking about earlier with running backs, like the talent pool of running backs is getting very low and the talent pool with wide receivers is getting very high. So we have a ton of options to pick from when it comes to wide receivers and like that type of skill position versus running back, where it's getting to the point now where I think it's almost smarter to prioritize picking one of these running backs like McCaffrey or Bijan or guys like that in that first round. And I think that, with the amount of wide receivers that we have, I think that the zero RB strategy, I think hero RB is the way to go, because I think the first couple rounds is where you're going to get one of those stud running backs. I don't want to go as heavy on wide receivers, in those early rounds as I normally do. I think that too many people are on zero RB at this point, and I think that, you know, with the lack of RB talent right now, if you can get a Bijan or if you can get a Christian McCaffrey, you know, someone along those caliber of running back, I think it's a smart thing to pick them now, early on in drafts, as opposed to, you know, guys like Justin Jefferson. We talked about several times. He's in a murky situation. We don't know, like a lot of these stud wide receivers that it made a lot of sense to pick early on in the draft. You know, we've seen it with Jamar Chase the past couple years. When Jamar Chase has been a top 5 pick, he hasn't delivered because he's either been hurt or Joe Burrow's been hurt. You know, like something goes wrong. So no wide receiver is a lock, just as no running back is a lock. But if you want to shift your strategy to deviate from the field and position yourself to do, you know, like to have a team makeup different than other people, maybe consider taking one of those stud running backs in the first couple rounds instead of defaulting to the zero RB strategy. It's trendy to hate running backs. It's trendy to go zero RB. So buck the trend, and, you know, consider that when you're drafting this year. Another thing, macro strategy wise, I talked about this with Meg when she was on the show, is the trend of, you know, these quarterbacks. Last year, everyone was drafting the quarterbacks in the first, like as early as it's ever been, and it busted for everybody. So now everybody has reverted to going away from those early quarterbacks. That's the time where you want to get in on that. You know, like get in on you know, drafting differently from the field, and maybe taking a quarterback super early, because now you're getting good value on those quarterbacks. It's not, you're not buying when everyone else is buying. You're buying when everyone else is selling, and that's what you want to do to differentiate yourself. And I think, you know, those type of macro trends are things that I'm going to be looking for when this Best Ball Mania drafts. And that's why we draft the big board, so we get an idea of, you know, how things are shaping up ahead of Best Ball Mania. But any thoughts on that, Steve?
No, I agree. It's always good to you know, treat every year differently, and look how the position's going. Like you said, is something being overdrafted, underdrafted? Where can you find the value at a position group and a particular type of build? Because it does change, it does matter. And, you know, like you said, like some of these top end receivers, it's not just their health. You do have to worry about their quarterback health. And that has unfortunately impacted some of these guys in recent years, including Jefferson and Chase. We know these guys are elite when they're on the field, but both their own injuries and their quarterback injuries absolutely impacted them last year.
Again, make sure to check out FanSpeak. Check out the Ultimate GM over there. Play around with it before the draft happens. And make sure to follow Steve on Twitter at SteveOSpeak, right, Steve?
Yep.
Just what you see down there on his lower third. So, yeah, thanks for joining me. And I look forward to, you know, kind of seeing how things play out in this draft. It should be a fun one to watch. And Steve, we got to get you back on the show at some point after where we can do one of these Best Ball Mania drafts.
Definitely. Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Awesome, man. Thanks for joining, and thanks for watching, guys. Make sure to hit the like button. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube page. Make sure to subscribe to the FanSpeak YouTube page, and we will see you guys next time.